Wow, it feels good. Who wanted a Zoom presentation today? You know, I got so bored with doing Zoom, I actually do national television at 12:30 in the morning. Any insomniacs who watch Fox News at 12:30 on Fridays, you'll see me. That's how bored I got with Zoom. So I am happy to be here. I'm happy to be back amongst live people, because Zoom doesn't feel live. With that, what are we going to be talking about? COVID, because we can't get away from it. Before we talk about COVID, I had a question. We're in Orlando. I checked into this room. I've literally not, my wife's my witness, I've not been in a hotel. I think I've been in one hotel room in the last 2 years. And Marsha, I think that was her meeting that I had with her group. I'm looking out the window and I see the globe from Epcot Center. Now, who has been on the ride that's the globe of Epcot Center? You can just shout out. What's the ride?
Yeah. What's it called?
Come on. Spaceship Earth?
Yes.
All right. So this is going to be a little bit like Spaceship Earth. I was thinking that. I'm going to take you kind of up. If you remember the ride, it's a little history of what COVID lawsuits look like and liability and what we were thinking of. We're going to turn around backwards, going on the back end of this thing. We're going to look at it like, all right, where are we now? And then we're going to predict the future. Because it's my belief, and I could be very wrong, that there is a false sense of security about COVID-19 being a lawsuit risk. So with that, I'm Italian, I talk with my hands and walk around. So if I'm in any way disturbing or distracting, let me know, shout out. Who here, now you don't have to disclaim it, and any of you who are my clients, please don't answer. Who here has been sued about COVID-19? Who here has had someone close that they know that owns a business, that's a doctor, that's some form of healthcare group that's been sued about COVID-19? All right, so I've been practicing, I can't believe this, for now over 20 years. In my 20 years of practice, there has been nothing, and this is the understatement of the century, that has been as impactful to us collectively as COVID-19. When we've had crises, whether it's 9/11, whether it was BP oil, we've always had lawsuits filed. Why? There's always somebody who's looking for an opportunity. Yes, I am going to bag on trial lawyers today. So if there's any trial lawyers in here, they probably want to leave, or maybe they want to join our firm. There's going to be something at the end that we can talk about. My dirty secret is I started as a trial lawyer. I actually worked for Aaron Brockovich's firm. It's the first firm I worked at when the movie came out. Seems like a cool gig, wasn't that cool. With that, why? Why have we not had lawsuits? So I was thinking about this, and I'm thinking, what was really the most impactful thing outside of COVID that I have seen or has impacted my legal practice in these 20 years? And it was the recession, right? It was the mortgage crisis, the housing crisis. So let's think back for those of us who remember, maybe we're homeowners. Did we see that coming? Did we see, remember the bubble? Who's seen The Big Short? The movie The Big Short. All right. I'm not gonna ask for a summary about it, but in summary, there were a few folks who figured out what was going on, and they ended up making an opportunity out of a crisis. But there was a false sense of security in the housing market. And this is a good explanation.
You know, for you, I'm considering treasury bonds and utility stocks. Smoke?
In the late 70s, banking wasn't a job you went into to make large sums of money. It was a snooze.
How about those Mets?
Filled with losers, like selling insurance or accounting. And if banking was boring, then the bond department at the bank was straight up comatose. We all know about bonds. You give them to your snot-nosed kid when he turns 15. Maybe when he's 30, he makes $100. Boring. That is until Louis Ranieri came on the scene at Solomon Brothers. might not know who he is, but he changed your life more than Michael Jordan, the iPod, and YouTube put together.
All right, gentlemen, let's get some money in here. Let's make some money. What do you say?
You see, Lewis didn't know it yet, but he'd already changed banking forever with one simple idea.
The mortgage-backed security, or private label MBS. You've got your average person's mortgage, fixed rate 30 years, boring, safe, small payoff, right? But when you have thousands of them all bundled together, suddenly the yield goes up, but the risk is still small because, well, they're mortgages. And who the hell doesn't pay their mortgage?
Who doesn't pay their mortgage? So that went really fast, but for those of you who saw the movie, remember what had happened here was back in the 1970s and late into the early 80s, they actually broke up investment banking and commercial banking. They allowed those to be separate departments. And what happened was, as you went from this traditional 30-year mortgage to these exotic mortgages that were filled with these subprime risks, remember that term? And they became things that had balloon payments. They were 10 years and they had this and that. Well, here was the problem. If interest rates went up and the government got involved, anyone heard of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac? Right? There were government entities that got involved and started buying these things. Interest rates went up, these things started ballooning, only a few people saw it. A bubble was created, and ultimately when the folks couldn't pay their mortgages, which nobody suspected would happen, only 10% of folks in this country couldn't pay their mortgages. We went into what was the Great Recession. And then the government responded afterwards. I think something like that, not to scare everybody so no one wants to go to the reception and throw up or whatever, but I think there's a lawsuit bubble. Why? I'm going to take politics out of this. I just told you that I do Fox News. I noticed not a lot of people left the room, so that means, that's okay. I've done headline news too, just to look fair and balanced. But that number, I don't care what political affiliation, I don't care what you think about COVID, 5 million deaths in the world, 747,000 in this country. We haven't seen this in our lifetimes. Why are there not lawsuits? We're at a conference that starts officially, I guess now, but tomorrow, for accountable care organizations, for healthcare providers who've been on the front line of this pandemic. Why aren't they getting sued? Why aren't the businesses getting sued? How many patients had to be involved in that death count? And no lawsuits? Well, let's see who did their CYA. Anyone hear of the PrEP Act before? If you did, Haley's here, my executive assistant, will take your application for our firm afterwards. We could use good research at any point. I hadn't heard of it until Joe, who's our young associate, had found this for us. The PrEP Act was enacted back in 2005. If that seems coincidental to SARS, remember SARS? Yeah, pretty much right after SARS. And what it was, or is basically immunity for pharmaceutical companies, when they go and create a countermeasure, which is a vaccine. This thing had not been enacted before. Now, I'm the son of a pharmaceutical salesman that goes back to the 60s and 70s who sold Sudafed and Actifed, and then eventually AZT in the 1980s. So I've grown up in pharma. My mother's a retired nurse. They're separated, that's a whole different other story. But at any rate, I'm a healthcare person beyond being a lawyer. This I've never heard of. March 17, 2020, the HHS director goes and enacts this. What does this do? It gives blanket immunity to Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J, the 3 makers of the vaccine. Why? This was the Manhattan Project, right? We have 2 administrations now who've been through this. One thing these 2 people have agreed on. If Joe Biden and Donald Trump walked in the room, they would disagree on everything other than one. The vaccine's great. Trump would call it the Trump vaccine. Biden would say more people need to be vaccinated. We've never had pharma have immunity like this. You can't sue pharma for anything that comes out of these vaccines. It was that important to get us out of the pandemic. But who else is shielded? Look at the top. Who drove this? I just said the former president and the current president. They're covered. Pharma's covered. Of course, the program planners are always covered. Now look at the qualified people. I will ask for some hands right now. How many health professionals, meaning that you're a doctor, you're a nurse, you're a clinician that's in this room who could actually administer the vaccine? Are there any in this room? Good news, you can't be personally sued. That is your major takeaway from today. Here is the bad news. Who is missing? Now I'd like to see the hands of how many people are in leadership at a healthcare organization, at a healthcare business, or at a healthcare practice group. Here's the bad news. You're not included. Pharma, government, providers, healthcare businesses, not included, not immune. Now the government does have a little bit of a compensation fund, but I'm Italian, and an Italian term for fake is fugazi. It is a fugazi. Countermeasure Injury Compensation Program. I mean, that's a mouthful. CICP. This thing was put in place. This is the epitome of a government program. It's supposed to compensate folks who've been injured in some way from a countermeasure, being a vaccine. 3,649 claims over the last 10 years, a decade. This is pre-COVID, for vaccine-related issues. You know how many have been eligible? 40. You know how many have gotten recovery? 29. The government's not backstopping this. They are not going to cover losses related to the vaccine. So while we have the Manhattan Project going, though, we have the vaccine and it's baking, and we saw stuff that, again, certainly wasn't around for the Spanish flu, but I'm assuming that none of us in this room were. If you were, God bless you, look great. But we had lockdowns, mask mandates, everyone here can quote it, right? 15 days to blunt the curve, 30 days to shorten the curve, 70 days to do whatever, right? All of these things we've never seen before. And what was that ultimately doing? Anyone involved in elective procedures or their healthcare business in some way is involved with elective procedures? Okay. Anyone involved simply with having patients and patients who are unable to, during this period of lockdown, get in because we all of a sudden decided that we were going to go from the Flintstones to the Jetsons as far as with telehealth, so they couldn't come into your practices, say your ACO, your practices within your ACO. We had to go back to work during this period. And think about COVID. Many of us know people who were impacted by COVID, but many of us don't. So many of us didn't see the shark in the water, or we didn't think it was that scary. So what was business's reaction? And again, this is about liability and why we haven't seen lawsuits. Why did business feel comfortable to go back in the water? I think this is a good example.
Martin, would you please? Chief, go ahead.
I just want to tell you what we're planning so far.
What about beaches, Chief?
We're going to put on the extra summer deputies as soon as possible. And then we're going to try and use the shark spotters on the beach.
Are you going to close the beaches?
Yes, we are. We're also planning to bring in some experts from the Oceanographic Institute on the mainland. 24 hours. I didn't agree to that.
That was actually from a board meeting that we had. I couldn't, again, The Big Short was in my mind about this, but Jaws, I talked about Jaws before, I scared people about Jaws before, it's one of my favorite movies. But I couldn't help but think that when we had these mandates and all these things the government was doing, and there was this shark out there, and there was people that were scared about the shark. To this day they are, and then there's people that aren't. So businesses had to go back, or at least some of them did. But what about, when we're talking about lawsuit liability, what about the spread? Remember, we're on Spaceship Earth here. The first liability risk we were looking at with COVID-19, and the one that personally I thought was going to be a risk, I'll explain it in a minute, was the actual spread in the workplace. Did anyone hear about this lawsuit with Walmart? Okay. This was actually filed April 6, 2020. somebody jumped this really quickly. It is a really sad case. This person was in like their 50s. I can tell you this could happen at my law firm. Selena's here, she's our HR ops person, she probably is cringing, but it could have, having the appropriate PPE in place. They didn't have sneeze guards, all the things that you now see when we walk into Walmart, Target, Publix here in Florida. None of that was in place. This person unfortunately got COVID, he was younger, and he passed away. This case got dismissed on March 8th, 2021. You know why? It was preempted by workers' comp. I don't know how many of you are involved in any way with your businesses with workers' comp. Workers' comp traditionally is for what? Working on a tractor, get injured, carpal tunnel, keyboard. There's this thing in the law, it's called but for. But for having not working at Walmart, you would have not gotten COVID-19. My goodness, I was just talking to my dear friend Joanne Ryan. I am convinced that myself and my wife, I have the story that everyone else probably in this room has, had it at the end of 2019 into early 2020. We were like one of the first people, because we were as sick as I ever remember being. And I see heads shaking. Everyone has this story. I got the shingles, which to me, I don't know, COVID is bad, the shingles was awful. How in the world can you say where someone got COVID, even to this day? So it did not become a lawsuit risk because the trial lawyers could not figure out how do we bring these claims. You had injured people. I just told you pharma's not gonna get it. The government's covered. You can't hit the company because you can't prove but for. But the states were still, going back to that Jaws analogy, the states were still trying to protect companies because companies have what? The character in The Big Short at the beginning makes fun of it. I apologize to accountants and insurance brokers. He should have said lawyers too in there. It would have been fair. But he talks about the fact that ultimately, when you're looking at something that's insurance or those types of things, how are you going to be able to get insurance? Has anyone had to go through an insurance renewal in the last year? There's a lot of questions, those of you who haven't, that deal with COVID or have issues about what your COVID policies are. Well, the states reacted because the states were local and they were closer to this. And what I find interesting about this slide is, look, the blue and the orange. The blue are states that enacted some type of liability cover. Again, this was so you could not get sued, your business, because somebody caught COVID there. Go to a restaurant, or you go to the doctor, you go in for an elective procedure, you couldn't get COVID. The orange, they had some type of legislation. Now, I'm licensed in Texas, Massachusetts, Florida, and California. I find this fascinating. California, Massachusetts, Florida, Texas. I mean, I could have ridden this thing without seeing this slide. But that goes back to the first question I asked. Why have we not seen lawsuits, and do we have a false sense of security? California didn't enact anything. Massachusetts didn't enact anything. I mean, you can't go down the street in California anymore without getting sued. Why did this not happen? Why are we not seeing lawsuits? And has it lulled us into this false sense of security, like mortgages not being able to fail? Well, we talked about the Manhattan Project. Now I call this the Apollo landing of COVID. We were all waiting. Again, getting back to our two different presidents. One of them said it would be out by last June. The other one said it would be out by 2022. Well, split the difference, and it was December 2020, February 2021. This was supposed to pull us out of the pandemic. For many of us, we're here today at a conference, and I'm not gonna ask the question, I'm a lawyer here, the last thing I'm gonna ask any of you is whether you're vaccinated or not. I don't know what Nicole's policy is. Disclosure, I do represent some of Nicole's companies, but no one's gonna ask that question. Well, we obviously feel comfortable to be here. But something happened just a few weeks ago. So we're not out of the woods yet. And it was in response to this. Did anyone expect, when we heard about the vaccines and we were going through COVID last year, did anyone expect that there would be rampant vaccine hesitancy?
No. I did.
Who said they did? Why?
I'm talking to my 20 and 30-year-old kids, and they said, I'm not doing that. It takes years for a vaccine. to come to fruition? Why would I do something like that, what they think made within less than 12 months?
20 to 30 year olds.
Yeah,
Very interesting.
yeah.
Can I ask girls or guys?
Oh, one of each.
How about you, sir?
10 to 12 years to develop a vaccine.
Mhm.
And if you listen to the virologists, all of them tell you you don't vaccinate during a pandemic because you're going to make the virus mutate. So I was listening to the virologist and they seem to be right.
So, I believe that the vaccine discussion has replaced sports as the national pastime. We're all gonna have Thanksgiving in a few weeks, and we're gonna be asking our favorite uncles, siblings, are you vaccinated? Why didn't you get vaccinated? We're gonna have the discussion that just happened right here. And there are people that suspected it, but I'm not quite sure the government did. Or did they? This is probably my favorite slide of this entire presentation. And I know it's hard to read, but it's actually from the CDC, but the backup to this is a study that they did in Israel. They found that the number one reason in the study in Israel for not getting the vaccine was actually if you were of childbearing age and female. Why? I'm not going to answer that question. Does anyone want to answer? I think we all know the answer, right? So we aren't answering. If you look at these two parts right here, the 18 to 24-year-olds and the 25 to 39-year-olds, whatever the epidemiologists tell us that you have to be over 70% or 75%, they keep moving the goalposts. But their numbers, this is October of 2021, are still at least one dose, they're below, and if fully vaccinated, they're well below. Now, I've got a few of them working here, and I'm going to tell you what their status is, again, this national pastime of if you're vaccinated or not. But the millennials are the number one workforce in this country. They are the largest group in this country in our workforce. And it's clear they have major vaccine hesitancy. And from this Israeli study, it's predominantly women and then men who may be in the process of considering having a family with a significant other. Now think about that for a minute. I'm going to tell you for my first decade, I told you my dirty secret that I was a trial lawyer when I first started as far as on the plaintiff side. I spent the next decade trying cases. That's why I like being up in front of rooms. This is utopia for me after how many years of not being able to do this. But I defended doctors, hospitals, nursing homes in catastrophic defense trials. The worst plaintiffs to be on the other side, the worst, were young moms. That's a pretty hard plaintiff to go up against if you're a defendant. That's a precious cargo. We haven't seen lawsuits yet, though. No one's heard about any of these lawsuits coming. We just went over, did anyone expect this? Well, there are doctors who expect it. There's some folks here that expected it. What did it result and what did it cause? So we've gone from the pandemic. Remember, we started this spaceship Earth ride with what started, which was this pandemic we'd never seen before. Pharma gets covered. The government gets covered. Business goes crazy because we got to get back out with these lockdowns and all this other junk. We get some state liability in place. All of a sudden we have a surprise, not to everyone here, but to a lot of people, the vaccine hesitancy. Then we have what the CDC calls the pandemic of the unvaccinated. And the government has to respond again, or at least it thinks it has to respond. So what's it do? This is what we're here to talk about. Remember Louis Ranieri from that first clip? The mortgage-backed security guy? No one's gonna stop paying the mortgages. So the government, again, not being political here, but the government, because of the pandemic of the unvaccinated, which is true, if you look at the numbers, factually, more people who are unvaccinated are having worse outcomes. And if the millennials are the driving workforce in this country, and the millennials are the most resistant, the facts are what the facts are. This is what this is. To be crystal clear, there has not been a law passed. I'll be even clearer, there's no final rule. It could have actually gotten passed in the last hour. That's how soon it is. But I think everyone thinks, probably a lot of people here, that this is law today, meaning what the vaccine employer mandate was. It's not. Not yet. It will be soon. You're dealing with it in your businesses right now. Every single day at our office, we are taking multiple calls on this. My inbox is exploding on this. I've been talking on TV and radio about this. This is the issue. If you are, I'll go very briefly, an employer of 100 or more employees, you are a government contractor, work for the government, or I'm guessing most of the people at an ACO conference, you in some way are involved in a business that gets paid by Medicare or Medicaid, mostly Medicare, right? You have to do, once this OSHA final rule comes out, because OSHA is saying that there's a grave danger because of the pandemic of the unvaccinated. That's the standard for OSHA. This wasn't passed by Congress. OSHA can step in, it's done it since 1905. This is the first time, though, that OSHA has stepped in, or something like OSHA in the United States, and hasn't said, schools, you need to mandate because everybody's got smallpox. That's most of the examples. Remember the measles cases? Usually we're telling a public entity, meaning the government. For the first time, the government is saying, private employer, to fix the pandemic of the unvaccinated, you need to handle this whenever this final rule comes out in the next couple of days. And quite frankly, if you're below 100 employees and you don't fit into any of these things, the government's just giving you the standard of care. I just told you I was a defense trial lawyer. Every single trial case is now going to be, yeah, but the government said everyone should be vaccinated, and if you don't, you need to have the weekly testing program. Well, that's going to be a lot of fun to administer. So I'm declaring there's going to be a new pandemic. And this starts the lawsuit endemic. And this is where I think we're going to lose this false sense of security. Because these emails and calls, and again, without getting into client privileges that are coming, flooding into our office, what do we do about the request for accommodation for these employees? There's two buckets, religious and health disability. Anyone who's my client in this room, anybody who wants to talk to us, Selena and I will be here for the rest of the conference afterwards. Under attorney-client privilege, there's not a planet where I want you taking a bunch of information about somebody's disability or religion. And you know what the standards are? Sincerely held religious beliefs. Since when do private businesses start asking employees if their religious beliefs are sincerely held? But that's what this mandate is telling you you need to do. Because if someone makes that request, you have to determine, are you a sincerely held religious belief Catholic? My wife can tell me no. She'd say for her, yes. And then how about your disability? Do we really want to find out that the reason you can't take this is because you have a panic disorder? Or you have some type of sexually transmitted disease? Or you have some other disability? It's hard enough in normal course having these conversations. And I'm going to ask another question. And again, I have a wonderful HR operations person in Selena here at my firm. How many of you feel that way about your HR departments? Are they the strong part of your office and your business? If they are, I'd love to know them, because we could use more of them. This is hitting right at the weak link of companies, and there is absolutely no rules as to how you're supposed to go about doing this. Has anyone got the mailer or the email from the government? This is how you do this? Please raise your hand if you have. I mentioned I'm Italian American, so I thought this would be a good example. This is how dangerous this is for companies. For the first time, you are being asked to be therapist and pastor to your employees. And even if you haven't been getting these accommodation requests, somewhere in your ACO, you may not even know that one of your provider groups is getting these requests. Do you today? Do you trust that provider group in your ACO has the right HR person to handle this? It is that dangerous than doing therapy on a mafia kingpin, because they're creating subclasses. You ever heard of protected classes in the law? Gender, race, age. Now, vax, unvax. Vax, because I was forced to get vaxxed. Unvaxxed, because I guess I didn't have a really sincerely held religious belief. Or unvaxxed because I do have a sincerely held religious belief. Or vaxxed even though I have this disability. Do you see the mess that's being created? And there's always somebody looking for the opportunity. So who won on the mortgage bubble?
Offering us a chance to short this pile of blocks. How?
With something called a credit default swap. It's like insurance on the bond, and if it goes bust, you can make 10 to 1, even 20 to 1 return, and it's already slowly going bust.
10 to 1, 20 to 1.
And no one's paying attention. No one is paying attention because the banks are too busy getting paid obscene fees to sell these bonds.
But wait, you are the bank. When you work for the bank, I bet your margins are pretty nice and fat.
Let's not talk about my margins, by the way. Being nice and fat, that's a nice shirt. Do they make it from end?
Aren't you the bank?
I work for the bank. I don't think like a bank. Big bank, small bank, I like to make money. All right? Let me put it this way. I'm standing in front of a burning house, and I'm offering you fire insurance on it.
How can these underlying bonds be as bad as you say? It wouldn't be legal.
Nobody knows what's in them. Nobody knows what's in the bonds. I've seen some that are 65% AAA rated, that I know for a fact are filled with 95% subprime shit with FICOs below 550.
So these guys, those of you again who saw The Big Short, these were the guys who made money on it. They were the bankers, were the people who Ryan Gosling, that actor, the character, is talking about to these guys, saying, hey, these things can be shorted. There's a loophole. When these things fail, you can ultimately make a ton of money on them. And they're gonna fail because nobody sees that they're full of junk. Your HR files are full of junk. And the government started it. Not making a political play. I don't care who was in office. I think they were gonna do it to get out of this pandemic of the unvaccinated, so that somebody could declare that the pandemic was over. So has the lack or fear of COVID-19 lawsuit bubble burst? Well, who again wins on this right now? I've told you all these deaths, who you can't sue. Who still is out there who may be hungry, who may have been hurting during the pandemic? This is just, yes. What did you say, sir?
Attorneys.
Yes, I am an attorney standing up here telling you, thankfully, I have a little survivor's bill. We've been doing great, taking a lot of these phone calls about these messy HR files. But there is another group that I used to do a lot of work with that aren't doing as well. This is the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. I only use it for a little bit of an example because I think it's compelling. That doesn't happen where you have that backup of cases that can't get to resolution. Ever heard the term speedy trial that we're supposed to have in this country? Yeah, this is like a snail trial. I've never seen it in 20 years. Why? Who's gotten picked for jury duty in the last 19 months? Who's gotten called for jury duty in the last 19 months? It's not happening. They just started going down and doing trials. They did a few Zoom trials, those were fun. Not jury duty, at least you're home, right? I know they recorded, you can edit that out. You can't move cases forward if you are a trial attorney, if you can't have a trial deadline. There is no rush to get the cases moving, to go to what's called a mediation. Anyone experienced a mediation before? Happens right before trial. It's not happening. So these cases were backed up. Do you know who were on the top list of taking the Paycheck Protection Act, at least for Florida? There's a public list about this. I don't have it on the slide, and I did that purposely. Quite frankly, some of these people are my friends, I didn't want to put that up there. You know what the most money was taken by Paycheck Protection? Law firms. And some law firms that I think you would know very, very well. So, who could be short of this?
Much of the fat savings being advertised on center-cut bacon, which by the way, it has 25% less, are due to a reduction in the serving size that Hormel uses for center-cut bacon vis-a-vis original bacon, not due to center-cut bacon actually being 25% leaner than original bacon. Brian, if this is just about changing the serving size, is it really 25% leaner?
Well, Shannon, let's be honest here. We are having people sue about the fat in their bacon. I'll say it again. They're suing over the fat in their bacon. It's bacon. I think the reason they're suing is the trial lawyers over the last year haven't been able to make the bacon. Why? During COVID-19, we've had shutdowns. People haven't been able to go to jury duty. People aren't getting jury duty. Just in California alone, between March and August of 2019 and 2020, 1.4 million cases less were settled. What's that mean? Trial lawyers are hungry, so they're bringing what I call these low-calorie lawsuits, frivolous lawsuits, and in here, the standard here is the reasonable consumer. The only reasonable consumer, with respect to my good friend David, that would be duped on this is somebody who thinks that this company engineered pigs that had abs of steel. I think this case can start out.
So, I don't show you that for me being on Fox, just for, again, proof that I have been so, not bored with work, but so bored not being out in front of people. I'm doing this at 12:30 in the morning on Friday nights. Shannon's lovely, by the way. This attorney, by the way, David Gibbs, was Terry Chavez' lawyer. Wonderful guy. Afterwards, disclosure, and he said I could say this, he agreed. And what he's seeing and his practice. Everything came to a crawl over the last 19 months. Have anybody been watching that? Does anyone care? I hate to say it again, there's no trial lawyers in this room. There are good people that are trial lawyers, some of them are my friends, but do people really care about the trial lawyers and that they may have been hurting? No. And then there's this, oh, well, nobody's getting sued. I don't have to worry about anything. But I just told you about this HR mess that's hit every company in the country, where you're now pastor and therapist. So who has taken a good look at this? Who here is in Florida, Florida-based?
We figured they've got a back room somewhere that they're strategizing after the end of the emergency. And we'll see more lawsuits. That's the actual emergency. That's the reason we're not seeing as many lawsuits. That's just us because we deal with groups like this.
What's your name?
Annette.
Annette. So you've seen it and been talking about it. We should work together. They already have.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not being political here, but it's public record that the Morgan sons, who are really lovely guys, John's sons, actually called Speaker Pelosi Auntie Nancy. And what I really found interesting, what's on public record here on their website, amid all of this change, it's understandable that you might be uncertain about your rights. Concerns that rarely before warranted consideration are now on the minds of many. I don't know, could those concerns be my employer asking me if I'm a Hasidic Jew, or if I'm a Roman Catholic, or if I'm an atheist, or if I'm a vegan, or if I have this, or I have that, or me having to disclose this? And let's go back to that group that was so hesitant about vaccines. Millennial, childbearing, women, and men. 20 to 30-year-olds. Not trusting something that came out this fast. Those are plaintiffs. Those are the plaintiffs in doing defense work for 20 years that we look at very seriously. So why an endemic? Why am I calling this an endemic? Why is this going to go on? Before COVID, the thing seared in my mind, maybe being from New York originally, Western, but grew up in New Jersey, was 9/11. We just passed the 20th anniversary, which is remarkable to me. When that happened, when those towers came down that day, we saw those folks walking out looking a lot like us with ties on, stuff. Did any of us think back then, wow, some of them may have had that dust that was on them, might have been a cancer-causing agent, carcinogen? Those cases are still being filed today. God bless those people. Why? The standard that not a lot of folks know. You heard statute of limitations? Yeah. When known or should have known. How would you know when that dust was on you, when you came out of those towers, that it was going to cause some type of cancer? It's a great question. A lot of folks wouldn't have known for years. They're still finding things out. So I'm gonna ask this question. Is anyone sitting here today, any of us, I'm gonna make a big disclosure, I am fully vaccinated, Pfizer. I'm gonna get my booster shot. Make a bigger disclosure, I have Crohn's disease, full remission, but I'm immunocompromised, so I needed to do it. Do I know what was injected in my body? Do I know the side effects? Do I trust pharma? And I'm a son of a pharmaceutical rep. Do I trust the government? Do you? Do any of us should have known right now what those side effects are? That somebody's looking into this, and they're looking into it hard. And I'm not just saying this, I mean somebody's en masse. Because we haven't seen lawsuits, and crisis always has them when you have deaths. The pregnancy danger zone speaks for itself. Whenever we have companies that will approach us, clients, again, not getting into privilege, and they say, well, somebody, a worker or employee is pregnant. That is the red stop sign for a disability request. You want to make a reasonable accommodation. The government and case law has said, make a reasonable accommodation. These are the folks that are en masse right now asking for accommodations. Many who are not yet pregnant are trying to get pregnant. We're seeing letters and authorizations from OBGYNs. Anyone here remember DTP? So what did I say? Pharma had immunity. The makers of DTP did not. DTP was 60s, 70s, 80s, right? Well, this was actually 2011 coming out of a 2004 or 5 incident. For those of you who don't know, this was a vaccine that was given after a baby was born, and it was for things like tetanus, ferret. Ultimately, unfortunately, and there was causation found for a certain percentage of babies and children had significant side effects. These were the types of payouts against pharma, who I've told you has been CYA. So, if we believe me, I could be bubble boy here. I'm on national television as bubble boy of the COVID lawsuit endemic. But what should you do? Our motto here is to lawyer differently. That's what we try to do at Genco. We believe in preventive law. It's why we speak at I'm speaking, and why we love being at Nicole's conference. And thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Samantha, and anyone who puts Flacos on. I'm a huge believer in value-based law. You know what we're actually creating at Genco? Value-based health. We are creating value-based law. Why? We look at things preventively. I did enough years of being a reactive janitor travel, cleaning up messes afterwards. We do things like risk stress tests on our clients. We try to find where their weaknesses are and can we button them up, fix them. That's why I'm here today. Call this legal therapeutics. For what I see coming, and for any of you that have any employees or have any oversight or work with anyone in your HR and compliance departments in these organizations, so that good healthcare providers don't get taken down because of a government mandate that's putting everything on you and giving you no prescriptions on how to mitigate your risk. So we will. Prescription 1. Arbitration. Anyone know arbitration? I will not go into my full arbitration presentation, I promise, because there's a reception happy hour that will be far more entertaining. But arbitration, in short, is where you don't go to a jury. It's not mediation. Mediation is kind of like a car deal, I always say. You know, they put you in one room, they put your other person, anyone who's had a domestic issue, everybody's in separate rooms, and then there's somebody in the middle who's an attorney, You see if you can work a deal out. If not, it goes to trial. Arbitration is not that. It replaces the jury. Now, I try cases. I respect juries. I thought juries got things right a lot of the time. I don't want my clients to put this type of stuff in a jury's hands. I serve as an arbitrator. There are companies that designate me, healthcare companies only, that designate me to be an arbitrator in their cases. Arbitrators are typically lawyers, 10 years or more experience, or retired judges. Why? Why is arbitration effective? I'm going to say something bad about lawyers and judges. Imagine this. We aren't really emotional about cases. We don't get really into the emotion when somebody brings up a big presentation. You ever seen the play or the musical or the movie Chicago? The razzle-dazzle doesn't work on us, especially any of us who've actually used that magic trick. Does your handbook have an arbitration agreement for all of your employees right now? If you're an ACO, do all of your provider groups have a handbook for all of their providers, for all of their employees, that has an arbitration agreement waiving the right to a jury trial? And look at that last part of it, that includes a waiver on participation as a named plaintiff in a class action. When I was talking about the bacon silliness lawsuit, ever gotten like 10 cents in the mail because you were part of a class action? The only one who makes money on class actions are the trial lawyers and the named plaintiffs, who are often the receptionists or the uncle. I'm telling you, I've worked in this world before. Pulling the curtain back. But you don't want one of your employees to be the named plaintiff. This isn't deceptive, folks. This is what good businesses do. Have it clear, have it conspicuous, saying that they're waiving their right to a jury trial. They can get all of the same damages, they can get all of the same things that they could get other than going to a jury that's going to be looking at things based on emotion. Ask yourself, does your groups have that today? Other thing that came to mind through this entire pandemic to me is Chernobyl. Whether you think it came from a lab, whether you think it came from a bat, I don't know. Nobody knows, I don't know. What I do know is that what happened with this mandate, we now have a mess of information coming into our HR offices. And is this information being treated in a confidential way, in a secure folder? Do you know if you're an ACA, an ACO of your practice groups, do they have a confidential folder within whatever computer system they have? Is it accessed only by the HR person, by an administrator? Can someone else access it? Why? This is really serious stuff that's in there. And oh, by the way, I'm not even so worried about the discrimination suits based on religious or disability accommodations. I'm worried about this. Someone gets turned rightfully because they're not doing that great of a job. They're gonna say, it's because I disclosed I am of this faith, or I am of this, or I have that. Which leads us to document. Document, 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 document. Imagine a lawyer saying that, and it's not a nurse. What's nurses say? It's not documented. Did it happen? I have some nurses here. Some folks that work with nurses. Same rule applies here. And look at that middle bullet point. Interactive dialogue with all employees seeking an accommodation. If you remember anything out of this from the legal mumbo jumbo, write down this. Tell your folks, put down in their communications with anybody about an accommodation on the COVID vaccine or anything about the vaccines. Did you have interactive dialogue? That is the buzzword for the EEOC, which is the federal, and then there are state level organizations that oversee this stuff. They want to know that you are talking with your employee about whether you can make a reasonable accommodation or it's what's called an undue burden. That's what they're looking for. You need help? Call us. Exit interview with class. Anyone know if your organization you're involved with, I'll ask a better question, but no one has to answer this because that means that you had to be exited. But if you've ever had an exit interview, there's a reason for it. It's not because they're nice and they really want to know, hey, how was everything? You know, God, I hope this was a great place that you worked at. And, you know, did you enjoy the breakfast that we had? Yeah. These are things that are prescribed, again, under attorney-client privilege for one reason, to get out all the junk. Find out if there's anything I notice we need to investigate. Here's the other thing. If someone comes back as a whistleblower, they can still blow a whistle to the government that, let's say an organization wasn't doing the right thing with reimbursement, billing, or coding. But if you've had an exit interview, if they didn't bring it up, it looks kind of silly when they brought it up 3 years later. With the vaccine, and people leaving in mass, resigning in mass, being terminated in mass over the vaccine, please document the reason they left, and the only reason they left, and have them sign it, have it notarized, was because of their beliefs around the vaccine policy. The gentleman in the back provided some very interesting things that a lot of people believe and think. Have that recorded, memorialized, not taped. This last one is something that we don't see a lot of companies do, and it's something we do at Genco for our clients. Anyone heard of Glassdoor as far as, not just for like Indeed or LinkedIn to look for a job, but Glassdoor as far as what's out there? If you don't, look your company up tonight. It's worth getting a password. I have no financial interest with Glassdoor. Why? You will find potentially some really, really odd stuff on there. It's mostly anonymous, in fact, almost all. Maybe you get the role of the person, maybe the time period they work there. But you want to see if there's trends, and if the trends are showing, oh my God, these people don't know what they're doing, they're forcing us to get the vaccines, they're turning this into some type of camp that we have to go to and put our arm out, or their testing policy is just, we don't feel safe. They're having us actually get the thing. If anyone's at the test, I'm assuming everyone in the room, they're putting it up our noses literally in the office. We've heard that. This is what you want to capture in an exit interview. Or see that it's happening on Glassdoor. Last, Ryan Gosling at the beginning of this made fun of insurance brokers. I'm the grandson of a State Farm insurance agent. And he worked like State Farm, like a good neighbor. No financial interest with any insurance companies. But have you looked at your insurances around COVID and lawsuits? Just because you haven't had lawsuits, if you believe me or you don't believe me, the part of the insurance that I want you to look at, or ask the people who do this for you, is employment practice liability insurance. And ask what the deductible is. A lot of those insurances before COVID, $50,000 deductibles. You get 5 of these things, that can rip a company up, that can rip a practice group up. And I've told you these trial lawyers are hungry. So won't the government immunize businesses enforcing the mandate? Does anyone here think, having heard me talk about this, that the government now, who's immunized pharma themselves, the states came in to immunize for a Lucchese. No one was gonna get sued for where you caught COVID. Are they gonna do it? Well, let's go back to the Big Short.
Mark, you there?
Mark. Also, Bernanke just left the White House. There's going to be a bailout.
Well, they had to. Right? Paper markets would
They knew.
Cash would stop coming out of ATMs. They had to back something.
They knew the taxpayers would bail them out. They weren't being stupid. They just didn't care.
Yeah, because they're some crooks. But
At least we're gonna see someone go to jail. Right? We're gonna have to break up the banks.
the party's over.
I don't know. I have a feeling that in a few years, people are going to be doing what they always do when the economy tanks. They would be blaming immigrants and poor people.
But Mark was wrong. In the years that followed, hundreds of bankers and rating agencies executives went to jail. The SEC was completely overhauled, and Congress had no choice but to break up the big banks and regulate the mortgage and derivatives industries. Just kidding. Banks took the money the American people gave them and they used it to pay themselves huge bonuses and lobby the Congress to kill big reform. And then they blamed immigrants and poor people. And this time, even teachers.
Cedric, Go back and watch The Big Short if you have watched it before. If you haven't, again, I have no financial interest, watch it. You know why? Brad Pitt's in it. I can admit this.
I'll watch it for that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Nicole, hey, my wife says it all the time, good looking man. I can say that, very, very good looking man. But he was excellent in that. And there's a scene where he's playing the guy who's really paranoid, supposedly. This movie came out in 2012 or 15. He's going down the escalator with an N95. When I was watching that recently, I'm like, oh my God, projecting this out. What is the #1 profession to this day in Congress? Yeah. Thomas Jefferson, we haven't changed that much. Lawyers. Is the trial lawyer a big lobby? Yeah. How about the defense lawyers? The defense lawyers, again, my model, Genco, is a monthly subscription model. We don't do billable hours, it's a budget of hours for our clients. We are outside counsel for clients that don't have in-house counsel. And we do it on a monthly budgeted hour. But I've done billable hour work. The defense lawyers who do billable hour work, do they have an interest? And I've told you again, and no one here has told me that they know anyone who's been sued. The lawsuits are coming. And oh, by the way, the government's helping. This just came out last month. This is not California. This isn't even my favorite vacation state, Maine. This is Sweet Home Alabama, where lawmakers have put a bill out that would allow workers to sue their employers for adverse reactions they might have due to the COVID-19 vaccines mandated on their job. This is Alabama, folks. If it's Alabama, it's coming everywhere. And this is the government, because somebody has to be the fall. And guess who the fall's going to be? All of you who are enforcing this. All of you who don't start doing the legal therapeutics, that regardless of what I've said, whether you believe it or not, is just best practices to preventing bad outcomes. I don't know if you caught this at the beginning of this presentation, but I always loved this quote even before I saw it in The Big Short. And it's so true. When we think about the mortgage crisis, it wasn't what we didn't know, it's what we thought for sure, that housing market would never crash. Before you came into this presentation, quite frankly, for months I've been sitting here going, well, you can't prove a COVID case. I don't know where I caught it. If I did, I don't even know that I had it, but my wife and I, we really believe we did. But it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. This mandate that was put in place, whether it was needed or not, I'll leave that up to you. It's put a burden on employers. There are hungry trial lawyers. That is a recipe for lawsuits. And unfortunately, no one's going to live by William Shakespeare's famous quote from Henry VI, which, any of you who remember it, first thing we do, get rid of all the lawyers. At least I'm hopeful that doesn't happen to a few of us that are sitting here, including the people in my firm. With that, I really appreciate the time. I appreciate always the microphone that Nicole gave me in a couple years that I haven't been able to get up in front of people. I thank you all for that. We consider at our firm that it's time to lawyer differently. Really looking forward to this ACO conference again. I'm a huge believer in value-based law. You guys are in healthcare for the right reason, health. Because I keep saying it, Freudian slip, believe in value-based law. Prevention, better than cure. With that, enjoy the reception, enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you very much. Real quick, I can, Joe Carlisle on my team, he put this presentation together along with Haley. If you guys could give them the person that my friend I was talking about, Selena Leather, is in the back. She will be at the conference. The rest of this, I highly recommend talking to her. She's been giving me a lot of this great advice, and she's an attorney. It's underprivileged. Thank you all again.